Welcome to This Explainer. If you are an educator, a language program administrator, or really anyone working in a classroom setting, you already know that teaching is essentially a constant game of trial and error. But what if we could actually elevate our daily teaching practice from just, anecdotal guesswork to something more systematic, evidence-based refinement? Today, we are opening up the Practitioner's Toolkit to explore two of the absolutely most powerful qualitative methods at your disposal: action research and case studies. Let me ask you this. Have you ever introduced a brand new activity, watched your students do it, and then later found yourself sitting there wondering, wait, did that actually work? How do you solve those everyday classroom mysteries? Well, that is exactly why this toolkit matters so much. We're going to look at how you can systematically investigate your own practice and uncover what is really happening in your unique setting. Okay, let's dive into our roadmap for today. First, action research, the upward spiral. Second, case study, the deep dive. Third, comparing the methods. And fourth, common pitfalls to avoid. Number 1, action research, the upward spiral. So, if we think about methodologies as physical tools, action research, that's your mechanics wrench. It's essentially defined as a form of applied, practitioner-led inquiry. Meaning, you, the teacher, pull out this tool to actively investigate, tweak, and fix your own practice. You aren't just a subject being studied by some outside university expert, you are the researcher. This whole tradition actually traces all the way back to social psychologist Kurt Lewin in the 1940s. He proposed that social problems could be studied and solved at the exact same time. The explicit goal here is practical, situational problem solving. You are not trying to produce broad, generalizable, universal laws for everyone, everywhere. You're just trying to make better decisions in your specific classroom. Now, notice the structure of the Lewin cycle here. Action research is highly cyclical. It's not a straight line. It goes through 4 main stages. Plan, where you identify a local problem and design an intervention. Act, where you implement it faithfully in your real classroom. Observe, where you systematically collect data. And reflect, where you analyze what actually happened. But here's the kicker. This isn't just a flat, repetitive loop. Your reflection feeds directly into planning the next cycle, refining the intervention even further. It is a genuine upward spiral of continuous improvement. Let's look at a real-world example to kind of bring this to life. Imagine a university English as a foreign language classroom. The teacher spots a very localized problem. Even though the students have perfectly reasonable language proficiency, they're just completely freezing up during whole class discussions. Basically, only a handful of students are ever volunteering to speak. The teacher wants to fix this. Let's see how this builds out across the cycles. In cycle 1, our teacher plans a quick 2-minute pair work warm-up just to lower anxiety. They act on it, observe by tallying the participation, and then reflect. The tally shows a modest increase, but the teacher's journal reveals that the quietest students are still completely silent. So, for cycle 2, they adjust the plan. They add targeted sentence starters, things like "I think that," directly to the warm-up. They act, observe, and reflect again. This time, participation broadens significantly. As noted here, several previously silent students were using those sentence starters verbatim before branching out. This proves exactly why that cyclical, evolving approach works so well. You don't just test to fix once, you tweak the wrench until the engine is purring perfectly. Moving on to section 2. Case study, the deep dive. All right, let's slow things down a bit. If action research was our mechanics wrench, the case study is the explorer's map. It requires us to step back and just observe incredibly thoughtfully. A case study is this in-depth, holistic examination of a single case within its real-life context. Researchers Gay, Mills, and Ariation emphasize that a case study looks at what we call a bounded system. This is absolutely critical. The case must have incredibly clear limits. It could be one specific individual, a single classroom, or a defined program, but it is bounded in time and place. It is not some endless, open-ended ethnography that follows a community around forever. Looking at the core features here, you'll see a case study really aims for what we call thick description. We're not trying to isolate one single variable in a vacuum. The context is treated as entirely inseparable from the phenomenon itself. To achieve that holistic view, you have to draw on multiple data sources. You're triangulating the evidence, so combining classroom observations with teacher interviews and physical documents to build a much richer, vastly less biased picture than any single survey could ever give you. Let's ground this with another example. Imagine an instrumental case study set up to examine a single grade 5 dual language classroom. It's strictly bounded to just one academic year. The researcher's goal here isn't to change anything, like in action research, but to deeply understand how a school's official bilingual education policy actually plays out in day-to-day lived classroom practice. After triangulating 12 observations, a bunch of interviews, and lesson plans, the researcher discovers something fascinating. While the official policy demands a strict 50-50 language split, the reality is way more fluid. And this brilliantly illustrates the power of a case study. The teacher flexibly shifts the language balance based on lesson content and what the students actually need in the moment. That highly nuanced, context-embedded reality, that is a massive gap between the policy on paper and the lived practice, a gap that a broad, district-wide survey would have completely missed. Section 3. Comparing the methods. So, we've explored the wrench and the map, but understanding the contrast between them is how you'll actually know when to reach for which tool. The crucial point here is the difference in the main goal. Action research is all about creating immediate, local change, solving a practical problem. A case study, on the other hand, is about rich, detailed description, understanding a bounded case on a really deep level. In action research, you, the practitioner, are studying your own practice in that upward spiral. In a case study, a researcher, who could be an insider or an outsider, is studying a fixed system holistically. Now, both have pretty low statistical generalizability because they're heavily context-specific, but they offer unbelievable value for those exact specific locations. It's also really important to note that these tools aren't strictly competing. They are highly complementary. A researcher could absolutely use action research cycles to trial a specific teaching change, while at the very same time writing up the surrounding classroom environment as a rich, holistic case study. They actually work beautifully together. Section 4. Common pitfalls to avoid. All right, whether you are turning the wrench or drawing the map, novice researchers tend to run into the exact same predictable problems. First up, the action research pitfalls. The single biggest mistake? Stopping after just one cycle. Look, a single pass rarely tells the whole story. The real magic happens in the refinement. Number 2, changing way too many variables at once. If you introduce a new activity, a new seating chart, and a new grading policy all on the exact same Tuesday, you have no idea which one actually caused the improvement. And finally, this is a big one, confusing enthusiasm with evidence. Just because it felt like a lesson worked doesn't mean it actually did. You absolutely must have systematic data to back up your teacher intuition. Now, on the case study side, beware of choosing a case just for convenience. Selecting a classroom simply because you already happen to have the key to the door, rather than because it perfectly fits your research question, is going to weaken your entire study. Another trap is relying on a single data source. If you only use interviews, you completely lose that triangulated depth. And lastly, letting the case sprawl. If you let your research loosely drift into unrelated classrooms or next to your student cohort, you dilute the precise, bounded depth that makes a case study so valuable in the first place. Lastly, how you write up these local findings entirely dictates whether other educators can actually transfer your lessons to their own settings. You've got to describe the context in really rich detail so a reader can judge if it fits their own classroom. If you are doing action research, be totally transparent about your dual role as both the teacher and the researcher. Show us the messy, evolving process of how your plan changed, not just some tidy final outcome. And always use pseudonyms to protect identities, making sure to frame your conclusions as possibilities to try out rather than guaranteed universal cures. Wow, we have covered a ton of ground today, moving from anecdotal guesswork to rigorous evidence-based tools. You've now got the upward spiral of action research to fix local problems and the deep dive of case studies to understand complex systems. So, my final, somewhat provocative question for you is this. As you look at your own classroom or program tomorrow morning, what is your very first research question going to be? Thanks so much for exploring with us, and I highly encourage you to go investigate your own practice.